Hello, my name is Tucker Johnson, and I am your host today as we experience NIMSY Live, where we talk about the latest and greatest in translation, localization, internationalization, culturalization, and all that fun stuff that global companies need to delight their international customers, or at least not to piss them off too much. On this program, we invite guests who like to have fun and have some value to add for our audience of globalization professionals. I'm always eager to provide a platform to those with a good story or a good data set. So let us know if there are any topics you'd like covered or guests that we should reach out to for future episodes. If you haven't already done so, then go ahead and hit that subscribe, follow, whatever button on whatever platform that you're watching from. If you are subscribed or following NIMSY Insights on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, then you're going to be one of the first people to get notified when we have new live streams or when NIMSY Insights publishes new research. A little bit about this platform. Most of you guys are coming to us live on LinkedIn today. It looks like we have about 24 people joining us, so welcome to all of you. If you like, you can leave comments, interact with each other, interact with us in the comments over there, and we'll bring those up on stream and respond to any questions or comments that you have. If you're not coming to us on LinkedIn, you can also use that comment function on YouTube, and it will still come up on stream. In case this stream gets interrupted today on LinkedIn, happens sometimes, then go over and check us out on YouTube. We should still be streaming over there, and of course we'll archive all of these episodes on YouTube as well as the podcast platform of your choice. Today, we have a guest. Before I get into the guests, let me just give a quick introduction to the topic today. Today, the title of our stream today is called Competing with the Big Boys. So let me just dive right in here. Although LSPs of different sizes tend to compete for different types of clients, there's occasionally some overlap. In a world where we are constantly reminded of all the mergers and acquisitions that are happening, and by the way, we're going to have a live stream next week, I think, about mergers and acquisitions. We're going to be doing more of those, so follow us to find that out. But anyways, I digress. In a world where we are constantly reminded of all the mergers and acquisitions that are happening, and where more and more translation companies are betting on size and scale as a differentiator, it is important to remember that in this industry of scope, not scale, there are still plenty of opportunities for smaller competitors to win. And this is where our guest, Filipe, comes in. Filipe Tiago Stankovic is a young and very motivated CEO who has been working as such for the last 3 years. He originally started by getting his hands dirty and being involved in every possible step imaginable of the company that he manages, Lingua Mundi. Now he is a bit more focused on just managing the company. He loves learning and has been truly blessed by an opportunity, although sometimes it could be a burden, that very few young people get, to be in charge and to be able to actually try his new ideas from all of the books that he reads. So welcome to the club, Filipe. Running a company, it's fun, eh?
Thank you, Tucker, for having me. Let me just start by saying I feel like I'm on TV.
You are on TV.
Because I've watched your show plenty of times, and I've really enjoyed it. I actually use some of your videos that you put out there on YouTube as training materials for my staff.
Oh, great.
So,
Well, that's
so
why we do them.
yeah, so I think it's a really beautiful public service what you guys are doing at NIMSY and what you're slowly but steadily building in terms of a community for people to share ideas. So thank you very much for what you do.
Oh, shucks. Thank you. Well, thank you for being a part of it today.
Uh,
Did I get
Thank
that
you.
intro right? Tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your company. I didn't talk about your company.
So, interestingly enough, okay, so we are currently 23 at our company. So I'd say we're relatively small on the scale of things, although for the translation industry, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Portugal, the typical translation company is like 2 or 3 people. So in that sense, we're not the smallest. We're not micro, but I'd still obviously consider us to be on the smaller side of things. We specialize in primarily legal and financial translations. with that being roughly 50% of our business. And the other 50%, our vertical would be Portuguese language specialists, and we sell to other LSPs. So, like you said, describe in your book, that sort of logic of MLVs that outsource to SLVs, single language vendors, right? And we're exactly there in the food chain when it comes to working with other LSPs.
Well, that to me is the sweet spot, and I've worked at small LSPs, I've worked at large LSPs, I've worked at medium LSPs that became large LSPs, and so I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Before we get going, though, I do want to give your company the plug. Where can we find out more information about your company?
www.linguimundi.pt. We also have a YouTube channel, by the way.
Oh, nice.
If you're a translation processes geek, and you like to learn about CAT tools, and you like to learn about interesting processes that you can apply to increase your quality and produce more standardized results for your work. Exactly, there you go. Those are the most recent ones. We've uploaded stuff very recently.
Very nice.
So we actually make our internal training videos available for anybody who wants to watch. I try to set an environment where people are generous with their knowledge and share with the community. I don't think it's cool to be a dragon and hoard up all the knowledge, all the gold, and keep it to yourself. I'm a believer in sharing.
Well, that's one of the cool things about this industry is the knowledge sharing that people have.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. People are incredibly nice. Like, the way I got started was just calling people up, of course, obviously I'm a little bit privileged in this regard, which is it's a family-owned business.
Okay.
My mother has managed the business along with my father for the first 14 years of its existence, then by herself until the business turned about 21, 22. And I've been in charge for the last 2 to 4 years, depends on how you count it. Basically, we as a company, sorry, I'm a little nervous. Like I said, it's like being on TV.
I'll bring myself up on screen. So standing next to an ugly guy like me, it'll make you less nervous.
So we've been in this business for a while, and I've been tremendously lucky in the sense that I inherited a lot of my mom's network of people that know her. But I think in general, this applies even for people who didn't have my luck. You can just basically call people up. I mean, including yourself and Renato, you're all extremely generous with your knowledge. You give very good advice. So it's literally like a small community experiment that we're running on on my company, which is me just calling people up who are generous enough to share their information. People like Vigdis Eriksson from Eriksson Translations. Jesper Sandberg has been extremely generous with me from Sandberg Translation Partners. I'm sure I'm forgetting dozens of people, but it's like a little sociological experiment that we're running in my company right now, which is what happens when you take a bunch of people from the translation industry and you get somebody to listen to their advice and implement it. How's that going? And I'm happy enough to say that last year we grew slightly under 30%.
Wow.
This year, we're expected to grow at about 20% rate.
Wow.
I think next year, we're doing pretty well ourselves.
So the experiment seems to be going well.
Yeah, I think so. Well, listening to people who know more than you usually helps. So,
listening to people that know more than you, in my experience, always helps. The problem is a lot of us, myself, I can say included, sometimes struggle to admit that there's people out there that know more than us, right? Yeah. So once you get over that first hurdle of understanding there's people out there with knowledge to share and you can learn from them, even though their experiences might be different, then it just becomes the next logical step. Reach out, ask for help.
Yeah, so, well, I'm 12, as you know. I'm not 12, but almost. I'm 28, so 28. I'm on the young side of things.
Yeah.
So it would look quite problematic, and it would be quite problematic if I acted like I knew everything. So
yeah.
I guess it's the downside of being the upside of being young and needing more experience is that you are more willing to listen to people who are more experienced.
Well,
I don't know. It's a
and
theory.
28 now, but 28 years from now, when you're 54,
Yeah.
then it'll be your turn. 54, I can do math. No, when you're older, then it'll be your turn to share that experience with the
Yeah.
newcomers in the industry. But one of the reasons that I've found that this industry is so open to helping and sharing knowledge with each other is it's not a traditional industry where everybody competes with everybody else.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different niches in this industry. So you mentioned you do like legal translations. Not every Portuguese company does legal translations. Some specialize in technical translations or software translations or what have you. So naturally, and that leaves out like companies that are not in Portugal. You're not competing with, even though if you're doing legal translations, you're not competing with the Swedish guys that are doing
Yeah.
legal translations. So because of that, this industry really lends itself well to people being open and willing to share because it's not like you're sharing with your direct competitors all of the time, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. I also think that you can share as much as even if you're extremely generous with your knowledge, only about 10 to 20% of the people in the room will actually implement it and follow through. So
right. Right. Good point. Well, I read it. I wish I could remember what book, what training, whatever this was, where I remember hearing this. But someone once said, and it stuck with me: if you're good at something, then give it away for free.
yeah,
And it goes against the what I've heard a lot more, which is if you're good at something, never do it for free, right? And particularly in what I'm doing these days with Nimsy, which is consulting, is I'm trying to every Wednesday do a workshop for free, a live workshop online. Now we sell workshops at Nimsy, and people subscribe to us, and we put together, 3 to 6 month learning plans for their teams and run regular workshops and stuff. So this is something that I'm actually selling, but the thought process is you give it away for free, and people are going to be interested in, well, if he's doing this publicly for free, then what else can they do? And someone like you, I'm not saying you should do translations for free, but LSPs like yourself are good about sharing knowledge, writing blogs, hosting webinars, stuff like that. And it's not just marketing material, it's adding value to the industry, right?
yeah, and it's just, I think everybody wants to establish themselves as an authority on something.
Yeah,
So that knowledge sharing part of the process is key to do that. And I out of fun the other day I ran a little online poll on LinkedIn
I saw
going
that.
like, should translation be a black box, or should be more of a should you really explain your processes and go into the details with your clients, right? And I guess when you build up this selection of knowledge or a knowledge base that you then go out and share with the world, that's one more discreet way of like sharing what your processes are and sharing what makes you different and unique without overburdening the people who are listening to you, or being a little bit oversaturating.
Yeah, here it is. Dear Network, we would really appreciate your feedback on this. Clients and providers, comments to expand on your answers are much appreciated. Should translation be a black box, not explain process but show results? Or should we explain processes and how they add value to our clients? 85% say that we should be explaining our processes. There's Anne-Marie, Nicola. You guys can go check that out. Go follow
Yeah.
Filipe on LinkedIn, and you can see more. But
Yeah, and that was 85%. And what was funny was that a lot of the people within those 85% were end clients. So which I found particularly curious, because those are the people you'd expect to be
not to
like,
care.
oh,
Just
me
give me the
results.
translation. Yeah.
Yeah. Translation is translation. Get me
Yeah.
some.
I've heard both. I've heard both from clients, and it's really depends upon the client, right? And it goes back to that nicheification, having different niches in our industry. I guess you would say diversification of our industry. That's not the right word. Anyways, it goes back to this characteristic of the industry where some LSPs are going to specialize in being fully transparent with the clients and reporting and high visibility, and some LSPs are more black box LSPs. And some clients want to work with the first one, some clients want to work with the second one. But getting back to our topic here, we're talking about competing with the big boys. So
Yeah,
you said you're about 25 folks at your
23 people. Yeah,
23 people at your company.
yeah,
And, someone told me once you should never call an LSP a small LSP
yeah. I know.
because it's, because you can always outsource more, right? We're service providers.
Mhm.
So there's no such thing as a small LSP. But, compared to the We Localizes and
In your book.
TransPerfects, yeah, exactly. I think
Yeah,
I wrote that in the book too.
yeah,
But
yeah,
compared to the really big boys, yeah, you're relatively smaller in headcount. Let's just put it that way,
yeah.
significantly.
Yes.
And you mentioned something, or we mentioned something in the introduction to this podcast today, which you wrote, so I'll give you credit. You said this is an industry of scope, not scale. And
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what did you mean by that?
So, what did I mean by that? I do think that overall, what happens is we tend to. So, I'll give you a practical example, actually, that works better. Um, the other day, I was talking to this person. They own a really, really small LSP. Their revenue is about 220,000 a year.
Okay.
And they have a 60% net profit at the end of the year. And I was like, how
Wow.
is this freaking possible? Like you have 60%. Like, I can't believe this. And it seems to be the case that actually translations, that's why it's so enticing sometimes to start a business. That's what happened with my parents in the 90s. And I feel like that's the story behind a lot of people who started their business. It's like the freelancer, they're getting more and more work, and as they get more work,
Yep.
they start to set up a company and start outsourcing some of that work. And that early stage in the process seems to be where people make like really good money in terms of percentage wise. So,
No
and
overhead.
once, yeah,
Yeah. You're
and
not
once
paying
you,
a bookkeeper and an HR person and a CIO and all of
yeah,
this stuff. So yeah.
a vendor manager, more project managers, a production manager, when you start needing to manage the project managers, right? So what happens is as you grow, you get all this overhead, right? And I'm experiencing that right now. And it doesn't seem like for a lot of clients that overhead is worth the benefits. Like, I'll give you a practical example yet again. Like I guess the standard typical end client for us is a lawyer's office that wants to do, or a small, medium-sized, or large company, but basically that they have like maybe 2-3 language pairs that they mostly need, and that's primarily their requests. And so for them, it would make sense to work with a local LSP
Yep.
because we have localized knowledge of the market. We can find Portuguese into and from basically everything. We've been lucky enough to work with the prosecutor's office, and crime doesn't discriminate. There's criminals from every country, so we have a very diverse pool of vendors in terms of what we can provide into and from Portuguese. So for them, it makes sense to work with a small company because what big companies bring to the table isn't necessarily of very high value to them.
Hmm.
So, for example, all that data collection capability and all that process, those maybe super specific processes, and the ability to translate into 200 something languages and do continuous localization and be super integrated with their technology. For a small, medium-sized lawyer's office, that's probably not too valuable, right? So paying for
Right.
all that extra value for them it's waste, actually. It isn't value for them. Of course, if you're now, the opposite is also true. If you're an IKEA, or if you're a Microsoft, or if you're a Facebook, if you're a giant company that needs stuff translated into hundreds of languages all the time, every day, every hour of the day, of course, then scale does matter. So
Right.
it seems to be the case that for certain types of clients, primarily the really big clients with very complex needs, both technically complex as well as linguistically complex, there seems to be benefits for to work with really big LSPs. But for the typical company, so to speak, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, and we've even seen some of the big companies. It really depends upon their strategy, but I've even seen some of the big companies want to go more to a smaller vendor strategy. And I remember five to 10 years ago, and maybe this is just me, but my observation was that the industry was trending towards single sourcing. So companies consolidating their supply chain rather than working with three or four different MLVs. I mean the big clients, right? Rather than working with two, three, four different LSPs, they would consolidate down into one LSP and sometimes even consolidate further so that they'd have an LSP that was managing not just all of their languages, but all of their services as well. So they were doing translation, they were doing QA, they were doing testing, they were doing managed services, and all of these things. And the thought process behind it was is if we simplify the supply chain, then we simplify that overhead that's required to manage the supply chain, and we get lots of economies of scale, efficiencies out of that. And my observation is that a lot of these clients have kind of been burned, and they've realized that that introduces a lot of risk into the process. Because if I have three or four different vendors, then one of them is not performing, they're not hitting their KPIs, then I can start shifting work away from that vendor into another vendor. Or let's say one vendor is giving me really bad quality results for Indic languages, then I can take away Indic languages and give that to a different vendor. But if you just have one vendor, then you're kind of stuck with them. So I've seen this trend where the biggest clients, oh, I'd hesitate to call it a trend, but I've observed that bigger clients are now asking us here at NIMSY about how do we get away from a consolidated supply chain? How do we diversify it and start reducing some of that risk, right? And just creating opportunities for quote unquote smaller companies like you guys for, companies like, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think Facebook is still working with a lot of SLVs. Netflix famously tried to go to a full freelancer model, and that didn't work out so well for them. But
because they're basically just trying to build an MLV inside your own company, right?
Right. And I think I see that a lot when a big client gets a new localization director who's comes from a different department and doesn't know anything about localization, because they look at the supply chain and they say what any experienced director would say, which is why are there so many middlemen? There's so much inefficiencies here. And they try to remove that inefficiency, and then they realize quickly that there's a reason for that quote unquote inefficiency.
Yeah, because just the amount of localized knowledge you need to service a language properly at the scale that it's needed for a lot of these clients, it sort of requires the sort of like MLV subcontracts LSP, which subcontracts translators or has their own in-house team. So it also seems to be the case that a lot of MLVs are building their own local offices in countries so that they can hire some linguists or some LQA specialists themselves in those countries. So it really isn't clear cut. There isn't like a one size fits all formula that permeates the entire industry. That there seems to be a lot of variation. So for the sake of argument, we have to generalize a bit, but it's still there are still some patterns we can draw from. Not to run away too much from the title, so competing with the big boys, I guess what I wanted to mention a little bit is, and not to use another industry buzzword right now, but as you were saying when we were talking about sharing knowledge and why so many people are eager to share, so there's a lot of co-opetition in our industry. So one of the ways, I guess, I could say competing with the big boys is if you can't beat them, join them, right? So supplying other LSPs tends to have lower acquisition costs, we don't spend any money on sales almost. We go up on occasion to some industry events, or I spend quite a bit of time on LinkedIn and making connections and meeting vendor managers from these larger companies. But other than that, the acquisition costs, I'm not going to say they're zero, but they're fairly low. It's fairly easy money. They set everything up nicely for you. You just have to learn their process and study them. And fairly quick return on investment as well. Low and quick, basically. So there's plenty of good reasons to work with the MLVs, especially if you work in some markets that are more low cost, as would be the case for Portugal, as would be the case for a lot of Eastern European countries. It's not necessarily even the case that MLVs pay less than direct clients.
It's case by case, for sure.
Case by case, for sure. So there's some of that going on. Now, there's obviously also very big disadvantages to working with MLVs. One of them would be if you want to sell your company. What I get from talking to other people, this is not my own opinion, but it seems to be the case that the LSPs that sell to MLVs collect a very low price on the market if you want to sell them. So there seems to be that disadvantage. There seems to be the disadvantage.
It's outside my wheelhouse. We do a lot of M&A consulting here at Nimsy Insights, but that's black boxed away from me because I have a big mouth, and that's under heavy NDA. But I do know that one of the first thing potential buyers are going to ask for, and investors too, not just buyers, mostly investors, is they want to know what are the big companies that you work for. And they don't want to hear that you work for a bunch of MLVs. They want to know that you work for Google and Microsoft and those guys. They want to hear names that you've talked to before. So yeah, I can kind of verify your assumption there.
Yeah, so working with MLVs, you also learn a lot from working with MLVs. You can take away a lot of good ideas from their processes. They have more time to work on their processes and a higher need. As you scale up, you have a bigger need for having everything nice and standardized, right?
Well,
consistent.
They understand the process too, right?
Yeah.
It's like they understand when you get a handoff from an MLV, they understand the complexities of localization versus a handoff directly from an end client is, they're working with you because they don't understand the process. So sometimes those handoffs can be a little challenging to decipher.
Absolutely. So you can get a lot of good ideas from MLVs, but there's also serious disadvantages, like again the price of your company if you're looking to sell, process extensiveness and process complexity, or if you want to put it a different way, process complexity and process rigidity would also be an issue for working with other LSPs that I found. So I've only been working in this industry for 6 years now, but one trend that seems to be happening is that MLVs are building up more and more processes for their suppliers. So you have the style guides are getting bigger and thicker, and there's training videos you need to watch. There's training sessions you need to attend to, and webinars. So they're basically requesting hours and hours of commitment on your part without even before seeing a single project. So, and this is across the board, seems to be the case. So working with MLVs does seem to have the burden of extensive processes and rigidity in processes. Like we have a case of a situation where the client owes us some money. I'm pretty sure they're good for it. They're a really successful company, but it's just that they changed something in the way that they're collecting invoices, and now we have to redo all of our invoices, and we're trying to explain to them, maybe we shouldn't. Is there any chance you can still take all of these the way they used to be done before? And there isn't a lot of opportunity for these discussions with very big companies because the processes tend to be fairly rigid, right? And for a good reason, which is you want consistent results. You don't want things to be reliant on people. You want things to be reliant on processes. And so that process complexity and rigidity seems to be one of the burdens of working with other LSPs. What else? The technological burden also seems to be increasing.
Got to work in their tools, their platforms. Yep.
Yeah, you have to use 12 different TMSs and 15 different supplier portals and 12 different CAT tools, which, for example, let's take our case where we take a lot of pride in getting really good at mastering one CAT tool. In our case, it's
Right.
MemoQ.
Sure.
So we have an internal team of translators. We've invested a lot. They know how to use all sorts of stuff, from regular expressions to term bases to auto translation rules to very refined QA settings to catch a lot of mistakes or to catch the right type of mistakes. Like a lot of different processes that make them more efficient and quicker. And like it seems to drop like a solid 20 to 30% when you're constantly jumping from one CAT tool to another, especially if you're using browser-based CAT tools, which prioritize the comfort of project managers over the comfort of linguists.
Thank
which
you.
is always that,
Somebody had to say it. Yep.
yeah, which is always that trade-off, right?
Which is important.
Yeah,
It's important to have the comfort of the project managers, but
Yeah.
I've often said that is that when, especially if the CAT tool request is, or the TMS I should say, request is coming directly from the end client, it's going through an MLV, getting passed on to the SLV, getting passed on to the freelancer, there's a bunch of different steps in there. And these clients, I understand it, they're paying a lot of money. Let's say they onboard XTM and they're using XTM to manage all of their processes. It's a fine tool. It's a great tool. Nothing against XTM. But once that gets passed down 3 or 4, you might end up with translators who just don't want to work in XTM because it's not their tool of choice. And so what ends up happening is that there's always this, and back in my experience anyways, there's always this conversation with the translators, like, no, you've got to work in this tool because the client's paying a lot of money for this tool and they want to be able to see you updating the strings in real time so that they can get the reporting, so that they can get the status update and all of that stuff. Sorry, you got me off on a rant there.
No, absolutely. And it seems to be the case that it's like a really big trade-off, and you sort of have to pick one side of the things, because browser-based CAT tools, they're really good at creating like an easy-to-follow workflow and to standardize processes and all of that. They seem to be really good at that, but at the expense of maybe not letting the translator get the most out of their productivity,
Sure.
right? So that seems to be the trade-off. Now, I prefer desktop-based CAT tools for one simple reason, which is when you break down the cost, at least in a company our size, 60% of the total cost of a word is still the act of translation itself. It's not project management, it's not sales, it's not paying commissions, it's not vendor management, it's not the overhead.
Yep.
It's still,
Just
which is still a big percentage. So I'd rather optimize 60% than project management. For us, at least, is around 10 to 15% of total costs. Per word, of the total per word cost, and I'd rather optimize 60%. If I get 10% of the 60% is 6%, 10% of 10 to 15% is 1 to 1.5%, right? So if I make myself 10% more efficient on the translation part of the equation, I'm getting much bigger gains than if I make myself 10% more efficient in the project management side of the equation.
Makes sense.
So I'm a little bit biased to the desktop tools, but what are some other disadvantages of working with MLVs? I'd say these are the main ones. So I know this is a cop-out to my own title, but one way to compete with the big boys or big girls, fair enough.
That's for you, Marina. Marina's in the comments. And
I actually took the title from Vigdis Eriksson once, who was telling me, it's important to know how to compete with the big boys as well when those situations arise. And it just sort of stuck, the expression just sort of stuck in my head. But you're right, I should, as a millennial, I should know better.
I fixed it. I fixed it up here. So in the title, it's big boys and big girls.
Nice. Thank you for the save. Yeah. Thank you for the save. So basically, I know it's kind of a cop-out from the title, but one way to compete with them is not to compete with them, but to co-opete with them, right? Yep. So you sort of cooperate where you can, and then you compete where you must. The other way to do it is sort of the old Sun Tzu expression, which is fight them where they're not. The conversation where we were having before of we're targeting different clients.
Yep.
in any case. There isn't like massive overlap. So just fight them where they're not. Go after the types of clients where you know that big overhead that these giant companies have isn't adding that much value to them. We're talking clients with very specific and few language combination needs. Hopefully that's in languages that you have localized experience in, and you can get the most, you can produce the most value for, and you have
Yep.
the biggest amount of resources and all that kind of stuff. So that would be on the other one, which, and I haven't watched it yet. It's maybe pick geographies that are still not very popular, right? So I know that you did a show about Africa recently and
Mhm.
its specificities. For example, maybe this is advice from me being Portuguese, because Portuguese is spoken in multiple continents, right? But perhaps something interesting if you're a Portuguese speaker is maybe consider the Angolan market or the Mozambican market, or markets that haven't been as tapped into yet.
Sure.
If you're a French speaker, there's other examples of African countries, and if you're an English speaker as well. But basically, maybe pick geographies that haven't been super popular with MLVs just yet, and that's another way to gain clients. So fight them where they're not.
To
That would be another
gain
advice.
clients from an LSP perspective, I always think of it in, as far as geographical expansion, I always think of it in two different ways. And one is chasing clients, selling, right? So like when you say Africa, what clients out there are localizing into African languages, and I can develop that as a specialty and sell to those clients. Or
Yeah.
another way of looking at it is what clients are located in Africa, and I can go sell to those clients. But also in our industry, because we're right in the middle of the supply chain on the LSPs, and LSPs are anyways, is how can I build a supply chain in Africa? And not necessarily just for languages, right? And I'm just using Africa as an example. But I know some larger size, medium to large size LSPs that have done a great job of building out production centers in Africa for project management,
Yeah.
for things like that, for call centers, Portuguese call centers in Africa, in
Yeah.
Portuguese speaking countries.
Cape
So
Verde, very popular for that.
yeah, lots of different options available out there. I want to get to, just because lots of people in chat today, and let's take a look at what people are saying. First of all, Lucia, is that your mama?
Yeah, yeah. Hi,
Aw,
mom.
hi
Watching
mom.
me?
Hi mom. I think my mom's watching too. I always send her the link right before I go live because I just like to hear your voice. I'm like, all right, mom, here you go. So if hi mom to my mom too out there if she's watching. So Lucia, thank you. Matthias Caesar. Do you know Matthias Caesar?
I do not.
Okay, Matthias Caesar's been super active. Lots of good stuff. I want to scroll back up here to. I can't scroll on screen, but Matthias, you left this formula. Here is a motto I have been using for a while now. S equals MC squared. Success
Yeah.
equals maturity times curiosity squared. And I really like that because we talk a lot about localization maturity in this industry, but maturity is not the only thing out there. Curiosity, I think, is really important too. And this is back when we were talking about, asking people for advice and listening to good advice and all of that stuff too. Matthias, again, I agree. Web-based solutions often enable less productivity, so the model of payment needs to change. Oh gosh, we're going there.
Yeah.
Um,
Please.
we're going there.
Yeah.
Why words? Okay, easy to budget, but just not mapping well with reality. No, what do others think? Hey, let us know in the comments, guys. We still got 2070 of it here. Respond to Matthias. What do you think about the current payment model of per word rate? You want me to go first, or do you want to go first, Philippe?
Go for it, Tucker. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm kind of a pragmatist. I like to call myself a realist, but to be determined. But when we're talking about changing the per word rate, I agree. The per word rate should change. Should is a very dangerous word
Yeah.
though, because should usually doesn't reflect, or often doesn't reflect reality. I think the reason it stuck around for so long is because historically it has been easy to quantify and easy to predict and easy to forecast, as you said in your comment here, Matthias. And that is why it has stuck around so long. Because if I have a handoff with 500 words, I can easily calculate what that's going to look like. However, I say historically, it has been easy to calculate. Nowadays, we have the vast majority of translations happening out there are happening with machine translation, right? Just raw machine translation. We never even hear about a lot of that just because it's happening out there. A lot of translation, and I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but a lot of translation is going through machine translation post editing, right? There's increased as companies, end client companies are turning their focus more and more towards global or local, I should say, user experience. There are teams out there that are looking more and more at transcreation and in-country copywriting and things like that. So I say all that to say this: localization is getting more complex and diverse than it used to be. It's not just here's 500 words. It's here's 500 words and what are we going to do with them? So that's why I say the per word model is becoming perhaps not obsolete, but insufficient. I think we can still keep using that per word model for standard translation handoffs moving forward, but we need to step up to the plate and offer other pricing models as well. And once again, LSPs like you, Philippe, we're stuck right in the middle, which means you're negotiating up and you're negotiating down. So it's not just one thing to be able to tell the client, here's the pricing model that we're going to use, and here's why you need to listen to it, because all of your competitors are giving them something that's much easier to understand. But you also need to negotiate down and basically train your supply chain to be willing to accept these new rates. So that's my stand on it. If you put a gun to my head right now with no prep time, what do you think?
Well, I agree with most of what you said, and should is a tricky word because the problem with units of measurement is once implemented, historically, they have a hard time being changed. Like I read somewhere that the reason why train tracks in the US are the size they are is because train tracks in England in the 19th century were a certain size, and it all goes back to like Roman roads and the chariots, the width between the wheels of a Roman chariot. So, the U.S. has done some efforts in the past with
Oh,
trying
you're
to
talking
implement the metric system.
you're talking to an American. Like I know exactly what you're talking about. We're still using feet and inches and
Yeah.
Fahrenheit and all of this other stuff. We haven't caught up with the rest of the world. So, yeah.
So units of measure tend to stick around for a very long time and tend to live as zombies amongst us for way longer than they should. So whether it should or not doesn't. I'm not sure that's the right question. Right question is,
Is it
will it
possible?
change?
Is it
Is it
possible?
possible to
Then
change?
my answer to that is no.
Yeah,
We're not ready
probably.
for it. I mean, people aren't in enough pain yet to
Yeah.
change. I think people, especially for an institutional change like what we're talking about, people need to be in a lot of pain in order to do that. I will say, going back to our theme of competing with the big boys and big girls, though, I could foresee if and when this change comes, and other changes like this that kind of revolutionize the way that we do things. It's not necessarily the big boys or big girls, quote unquote, that are bringing about these changes because in my experience, I think sometimes the small and medium sized LSPs are much more strategically positioned to be able to try new things and experiment with new things. Whereas there's too much bureaucracy, too many standards and processes and stuff like that working at the big companies. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree. When it comes to innovation, it seems to be the case that big companies can do a lot more experiments at once because just the size. But it still all comes down to, and going back to competing, if you're competing on a project with a big LSP, it still boils down to a really small team within that giant company, that's doing the work. And the same, and so we're a small team, they're a small team, so it's fair game to some extent. I think this is also true for innovation, right? So they have like they're working on a lot of different areas. So you don't have that benefit if you're really small. You have to like really pick your battles carefully.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still innovate quite a bit. Like I can give you some practical examples of some stuff that we're working on right now.
Yeah.
We are working heavily on building regular tools of regular expressions, filters, and auto translation rules that catch certain grammatical patterns automatically, instead of relying on things like style guides. Because style guides, they're kind of so the style guides are kind of like
style guides require that the translator actually read them.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of these style guides are like 60, 80 pages. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is, do you expect the translator to sit there and read 60 pages and not get compensated for it before they can translate a single word? Yeah. I was just talking with Vasilis from Lexica the other day, and we went in on this. So sorry to interrupt. Go.
No problem. So to me, a style guide is kind of like how in the old days factories would have if you're stamping some sheet of metal with a form, and they put a sign saying, "Don't put your hands in the machine, otherwise your hands will get crushed."
That's important.
And then that sign would just become part of the background when people have been working there for months and years and all that stuff. And then they put their hands in the machine and they crush their hands. So nowadays, what we do is you have machines that require both hands to be operated, and will only work if people have both of their hands in the dials that they're supposed to be using. So that's basically just an analogy for you don't want processes that rely too much on people reading them for them to work. You want processes that work automatically and that are fairly intuitive to follow, right? So, for example,
but you said it earlier, right? Is focus more on the process than on the people, right?
Yeah.
Because people can forget, people can make mistakes, people can change. So what's the process?
Exactly. So right now we're working on building really specific and ironclad quality assurance rules to make QA settings, using automatic translation rules. So for example, currency settings and what else would be another example? Dates, how to structure dates in a specific, or articles for legal, right? Like how to automatically do the conversion of an article, a legal article from one system to the other. Like build that stuff up. MT performs fairly poorly with that stuff as well. So that's something we can do that complements machine translation very well, building that level of consistency. And that's something we can do, and probably they can't, because it requires to have both some technological skills, but also some very specific in-depth knowledge of the target language that you're using to program these auto translation rules for them to be used. So you can't, that's something that you're a small company, you can do. We have 2 people working on it primarily. It's much easier to implement on your team because you don't have a giant team, you have a small team. So that makes it easier to then apply.
It's just the truth. Like I was on a call this morning. We're revamping one of the tools available on our website, the virtual interpreting technology. Hi, Rosie, if you're watching, you're doing a great job. And I was thinking to myself, like, things were easier 5 years ago when it was like me and Renato. It's like if I wanted a web page, I just made a web page, and that was it, right? There was no need. We didn't run it through marketing. We didn't send it to design. We didn't do blah, blah, blah testing and all that stuff. So sometimes it's easier and quicker and more efficient to get things done with 2 people than if you have a team of 20 developers that need to be managed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that seems to be one of the big disadvantages, of being small, is agility, right? Which is something you sort of lose as you grow. And agility seems to, because this is problems. We solve problems, right? Like any industry, we solve problems. But in our case, there is also a sense of a very fast pace associated with our industry, which means that flexibility is an extremely highly valuable asset,
Yep.
not to be rigid. And like, so let me ask you this:
Okay.
Why do you think there are being so many mergers and acquisitions right now? Why do you think what do you think the strategy behind getting big seems to be as a competitive advantage?
I mean, right now is like I told you, M&A is not my expertise. I can refer you over to Renato and Jo and Christopher on our team. They're the ones taking care of all of that. But this industry has always had M&A activity, and in my opinion, this isn't data backed expertise, but my opinion is that everything that LSPs do in our industry is driven by client need, right? So clients or LSPs grow through acquisition so that they can better serve their clients, and whatever that might look like. It might mean there might be an acquisition to add a capability. So you might hire a voiceover studio, or you might buy a voiceover studio to add that to your capabilities. You can buy expertise, you can buy people, you can buy technology, you can buy market reach, you can buy clients, you can buy Rolodexes, right? I might buy a client that's working with Apple, or buy an LSP that's working with Apple because I want into the Apple accounts, right? It's risky, but there's all sorts of different reasons to grow. LSPs don't acquire other LSPs just because they want to. It's not just for ego, right? It's not just because they want to get bigger. There's usually something strategic going on with it, and sometimes that strategic thing might just be they have money to spend and they don't want to pay taxes on all of it, so they buy someone else. They spend that money.
So do you think that with the custom MT and the need to feed these engines data and to make them better and that kind of stuff, there are some advantages to being to size that maybe didn't exist a few years ago, like leveraging of data, and data needs to be, you need to have a lot of it for it to be useful. Do you
To
think that helps as well?
to me, the advantage of size, like if I was a client and trying to decide, should I hire a small guy, should I hire a big guy, and
Hmm.
or gal, the reason I would go with the big guys or gals is essentially risk mitigation. It goes back to that old saying that nobody gets fired for hiring IBM, right?
Hmm.
Because you can always say, look, I hired the third largest LSP in the industry. These guys have been around forever, and it's not my fault they failed. But if I, as a local buyer, decide to take a risk and hire someone I've never heard of, some smaller company, then my boss could come back to me and say, why'd you do that? Right? And people make, it's still a people-driven industry. People make people-driven decisions, and or people make personal decisions, right? And there's another saying. It's people make. I think this is a Jeffrey Gitomer quote. People make personal. People make decisions for personal reasons, and then find objective. Or people make decisions
Hmm.
for subjective reasons, and then they
Yeah.
find objective reasons to support their decision. Right.
And for emotional reasons, and then they find
That's it. That's it.
logical arguments to back it up.
Yeah, you've heard it
Yeah,
before. Let's
yeah.
let's look at the comments here really quickly because we're running out of time here. And Anne Marie, I'll get to you. Uh, I agree. Okay, no, Anne Marie, we are talking about the quotes or the per word rate. Anne Marie says that 20 years ago, don't date yourself, Anne Marie. 20 years ago, they were talking about the shifting from per word price to hourly rates. She says that was the first big debate we've had in our translation company when she joined in 1990, right? Reem El Khadi says, if we think about it from the end client perspective, this is not what they are paying. We're talking about the rate conversation, the per word rates. If we think about it from the end client perspective, this is not what they are paying us for to know how many words they are needing to translate. What they are paying for is getting their content available in language to reach different markets. So they feel overwhelmed when we provide this payment model. I've seen that before too. Immature, quote unquote, immature clients who'd never seen a per word payment model before. They're like, look, I don't care how many words it is. I just need my website translated.
Yeah.
Right. Matthias Caesar, who wins the most active commenter award today, sent a link. You guys can, in the comments, go check that out. I brought it up on screen here. A Travel Through Space, Time, and Size, A Personal Journey by Matthias Caesar. And this is a slide deck. I don't have
Oh,
time to review it on air right now, but I will definitely take a look at this afterwards. Once again, if you guys are watching, it's available as a link here on LinkedIn. And Matthias, you should come on an episode of Nimsy Live and talk about it with us. I'm
absolutely.
extending you an invitation right now. So I didn't get through all the comments, but that's as much as I'm going to get through today because we got 5 minutes left here, Philippe. And I wanted to ask you all of this has been a very enjoyable, meandering conversation today.
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed it. So to end it, what
Me
is
too.
some advice? Because I mean, this is what we were doing here. We're trying to add value to other people, and so based upon your long 28 years of experience on this earth, what advice would you have to quote unquote smaller LSPs out there that are looking to grow, looking to make a name for themselves, looking to diversify, looking to reach their goals? What advice would you have for them?
Go on Nimsy Live with Tucker Johnson. No,
Nice,
like,
nice. Your check's in the mail.
so, what would be some advice? Well, first of all, I get the feeling that when you go to a lot of networking events and um, there's this vibe that bigger is better, right? Like if I ask you what your revenue is and you tell me what your revenue is and I know mine and mine's lower than yours, I sort of feel bad, right?
Mm,
Like, so
mm,
the old saying, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. So that's important. Like, don't be obsessed with this idea that size bigger equals better. I
true.
started this conversation by giving some examples of how sometimes you can have a two people team and you can make massive margins and really good profit. And sometimes when you look at certain companies that have a 1 million euro, 2 million euro revenue, and actually they just have about 30% of those clients actually making their money and the rest is all white noise. So be careful with that. Win at any cost. That seems to be a dangerous philosophy for LSPs to pursue. So what else would be valuable advice for wanting to grow? Um,
Don't
be
co-
patient, take your time, steady, and invest in your processes, because that's where we're usually actually on the weak side. Is smaller LSPs tend to be very flexible, but we tend to wash over the relevance of having like really good processes, and that's something. So work on your work instructions, work on your checklists, work on automating as much as you can in terms of quality assurance processes. I'm very much a quality nerd, so sorry if I was a little bit boring with the example of the regular expressions and auto translation rules, but that stuff is important. That's
it
how,
is.
what does quality look like in practice? Well, that's it. Consistent processes to produce consistent results. So
All good advice. Thank you so much, Philippe.
thank,
Uh,
thank you. Hopefully people got something out of this.
I think they did. And once again, go follow Philippe on LinkedIn. Go follow the YouTube channel for those videos. I'm gonna take us out here, but really quickly, our next episode coming up on December 5th, I believe, an LSP Owners M&A Exit Experience. So we talked a little bit about M&A today. Next week, we're going to hear from Michelle Hecken, who had a successful exit from her company, Alpha Translations, up in Canada. So I think I'm going to be doing that with me and Renato. So follow Nimsy Insights and come join us so that you can be part of that. Well, ladies, gentlemen, chat, we are out of time today. But if you enjoyed this Nimsy Live experience, then join us next week when we talk to Michelle. If you're not already signed up, you can go sign up on that right now. You'll be notified when we go live. Once again, finally, my name is Tucker Johnson, host of Nimsy Live, and it has been my pleasure to join you today as we all experience Nimsy Live together. I'd like to thank my guest, Filipe, today. I'd like to thank all my colleagues here at NIMSY Insights for all of the hard work that they're doing so I get to have these fun conversations. And I'd like to thank everybody in our industry who fills out NIMSY surveys and schedules briefings with our analysts so that we can include you in our published industry research. Last but not least, I'd like to thank you guys in the audience who've all joined us live today. I appreciate the dialogue and chat, everybody who left comments, questions, and especially criticisms. And I look forward to next time. Ciao.